Pekný podvečer. Dovolte mi privítať vás na dnešnej prednáške diskusii. Moje meno je Richard Durana a som riaditeľom INESS, Inštitútu ekonomických a spoločenských analýz, taký ten ekonomický think tank, ktorý asi poznáte a sledujete a ktorý dnešnú prednášku doktora Seana Gabba organizuje. Sean Gabb je tradičný host letný nášho inštitútu, on tu má totižto časť rodiny a dochádza každý rok. Možno niektorí z vás vedia, a možno nie, že v rokoch 91 až 92 pomáhal ako radca vtedajšieho slovenského premiéra pri transformácii slovenského hospodárstva z tej socialistickej ekonomiky na trhové hospodárstvo, čiže jeho vzťah k Slovensku je taký celkom intenzívny a živý, sleduje dianie na Slovensku. Sean Gabb je v súčasnosti viceprezidentom Ludwig von Mises Center v Spojenom kráľovstve vo Veľkej Británii, je predchádzajúcim riaditeľom Libertarian Alliance. Je to taký vážený a vzácny človek vo Veľkej Británii, pretože teda už dlhoročne sa vyjadruje k spoločenským a ekonomickým témam. Dnes nám bude rozprávať na tému na najvyš aktuálnu stále, aj keď tá téma rezonuje už viac ako rok. Bude nám rozprávať o Brexite a o tom, čo k nemu viedlo. Na Slovensku totižto stále vnímame ten Brexit tak celkom čierno-bielo a keď som sa aj s doktorom Gabbom rozprával dnes na obede o tom, ako informujú zahraničné médiá o Brexite, tak jeho pohľad je taký, že tie médiá o tom informujú pomerne zle, nekvalifikovane a bez takého nejakého kontextu a poznania všetkých súvislostí. Že väčšinou to býva vnímané tak čierno-bielo, je to polarizované a chýba taký ten historický jednak a aj taký ten situačný pohľad na to, čo sa vlastne v Anglicku deje, respektíve vo Veľkej Británii a aké sú vzťahy Veľkej Británie a Európskej únie. No a v dnešnej krátkej prezentácii nám Sean Gabb porozpráva niečo o tom, ako sa vlastne dlhodobo vyvíjali vzťahy Spojeného kráľovstva a Európskej únie, o tom, aké kontroverzné bolo samotné rozhodnutie vstúpiť do Európskeho spoločenstva, do Európskej únie v roku 1972 a čo vlastne viedlo k Brexitu, čo bude nasledovať po ňom a aké budú asi dôsledky tohto rozhodnutia a plus teda možno aj nejaké také procesné veci. Táto prednáška nebude taká tá typická, ako sme to robívali po minulé roky, ktorá teda tie prednášky zvyčajne mali tak viac ako hodinu. Dnes sme sa s doktorom Gabbom dohodli, že to robí tak na nejakých 30-35 minút a potom nechá priestor pre vaše otázky, ktoré možno indukujú nejakú ďalšiu zaujímavú diskusiu a budete sa môcť pýtať to, čo vás ohľadom Brexitu zaujíma a možno sa dozviete niečo zaujímavé, čo sa nedozviete zo samotnej prednášky. No a týmto teda odozdávam slovo doktorovi Gabbovi a prajem vám silný intelektuálny zážitok. Ďakujem.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out on a very hot Tuesday afternoon to listen to me. Before I begin, I would like to thank the good people of INESS for having invited me to speak once again this year. I always enjoy my little talks to INESS in the summer. They have, as Richard said, become a tradition, and I'm glad to continue it. The second point I would make is that I do appreciate that I'm a guest in your country. I'm sure that your English is excellent. Indeed, I know that your English must be better than my Slovak. At the same time, I do appreciate that I am speaking to you in a foreign language, and so I will do my best to speak slowly and clearly and grammatically. If it turns out by the end of what I have to say that you have not understood me, then I shall regard myself as having made a bad speech to you. So if there is anything you do not understand, please make a note of it and be prepared to ask about it at the end. With that being said, I will begin. If you look at the two main English-speaking powers in the world at the moment, what you see is a spreading wave of chaos. I will not focus on the United States because I know almost as little about what is happening in that country as you do. But I think we can agree that American politics this year have been embarrassing, have been to some extent disappointing, and are also worrying so far as we might not be that very far removed from a nuclear exchange with North Korea. If anybody understands what is happening in the United States, he knows a great deal more about the country than I do. Now, although in my own country, Britain, there is no chance of nuclear war, and we are not led by somebody quite as erratic as Donald Trump, there is also a degree of chaos. And this degree of chaos is something that does affect all of us. It affects me, quite obviously, because I'm a British citizen, I live there. It also affects you as Slovaks because we are joined at the moment as members of the European Union, and we are about not to be joined. And what that means for my country and what it means for your country is, or should be, a matter of considerable importance. I do not claim any kind of inside knowledge of what will happen in the next 2 years, though I do assure you it will be very exciting. What I can do, however, is to explain some of the historical background to what has led to our present situation. That being said, let me begin with the historical background to the British departure from the European Union. I think the best place for starting, I will go back further, but the best place for starting is to say that in the year 2010, that is 7 years ago, David Cameron, as leader of the Conservative Party, won a general election in Britain, but failed to secure an overall majority in the House of Commons. That means that the Conservatives at the 2010 general election were the largest party in Parliament, but they did not have 50% plus one of the seats. That meant that Mr. Cameron was required to go into a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. I will not say that during the next 5 years Mr. Cameron governed my country particularly well. No politicians have managed that in living memory. What I will say is that within the assumptions of British political debate, he governed the country effectively. And when the time came for the next general election in 2015, Mr. Cameron's greatest single ambition was to get a majority in the House of Commons for the Conservative Party. And this is where our present situation begins. And to do this, I should say something now about our earlier history of dealings with the European Union. Remember where I'm leaving you. I'm leaving you thinking about the 2015 general election. David Cameron must secure an overall majority for the Conservative Party, and this is intimately connected with the British debate over membership of the European Union. And so keep that thought in your heads as I go back to explain how we joined the European Union. We joined the European Union on the 1st of January 1973. This was a very controversial decision in British politics. It was controversial for a number of reasons. It was also a departure from our traditional political debates. During the 20th century, British debate on trade policy fell between two extremes. On the one hand, you had people who believed in unilateral free trade. This was the policy that we adopted in the 1840s and continued into the 1930s. It seems to have been a policy which brought considerable benefit to the country, and there were many people throughout the 20th century who believed that a continued policy of unilateral free trade would be in our interest. At the other extreme were people who believed not in total protection, but who believed in a close union with the British Empire, or after that, a close union with the British Commonwealth. So that, for example, the former colonies in Africa would provide us with copper, would provide us with groundnuts, would provide us with a whole range of raw materials, and the Australians and New Zealanders would provide us with food, and the Canadians would provide us with wheat, in return for which we would provide them with manufactured goods and later on with various kinds of financial service. And so this is a customs union based on membership of the British Empire or later on the British Commonwealth. And this was the debate during the 20th century: free trade or empire or Commonwealth free trade. Joining the European Union, or as it was called in those days, the European European Economic Community, wasn't it? EEC, that's right. Joining the European Union or the European Community was a departure from any traditional conception of British trade policy. It also involved questions of sovereignty, so far as government in my country was now subject to external limitations. It also, there were so many reasons why membership of what became the European Union was controversial. It was controversial and it was unpopular. And so from 1973 onwards, there were groups opposed to our continuing membership with the European Union. Most of these groups were associated with the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party was in government in 1972 and 73, and they took us into the European Union. But the main opposition to membership was within the Conservative Party, and so the Conservative Party itself was split. This split seemed to close during the high years of Margaret Thatcher. But as soon as Margaret Thatcher was gone, after 1990, the division opened within the Conservative Party. The division within the Conservatives over membership of the European Union was one of the reasons, not the reason, but one of the reasons why Labour was able to win the 1997 general election with such a convincing majority. It was one of the reasons why Tony Blair was able to dominate British politics for a decade. And the European debate was generally bad for the Conservative Party. Now, let's come back to 2015. David Cameron wants to win the general election. He wants the Conservative Party to have at least 50% of the seats in the House of Commons. His problem is that over the previous 20 years, you've had the emergence of the UK Independence Party, which believes in total withdrawal from the European Union. This party at first seemed to be a joke. Nobody thought anything would come of it. And then it began to win seats in elections to the European Parliament. And the Conservatives told themselves, oh well, UKIP may win seats to the European Parliament, but it will never be able to replace the Conservatives in British politics, in domestic politics. These people will never win a seat in Parliament. And to that extent they were right. The UK Independence Party has only ever won 2 seats to Parliament. But so many millions of Conservative voters decided to vote for the UK Independence Party in 2005 and in 2010 that they were able to prevent the Conservatives from winning. In the 2005 general election, if everyone who voted UKIP had voted Conservative, Tony Blair would have lost. He would have been out of number 10 Downing Street. In 2010, if everyone who voted UKIP had voted Conservative, David Cameron would have got a good majority in the House of Commons. And so in 2015, David Cameron wants to win the election, and he needs to stop people from voting for the UK Independence Party. How does he do that? Well, what he could do is say, if I win the next election, I promise to take this country out of the European Union. You can't do that. No, you can't say that at all. So he did the next best thing. If you vote for me, if you vote Conservative, I promise that we shall, at some time, have a referendum in which you, the people, can decide whether to stay in the European Union or leave it. And it worked. 3 million people still voted for the UK Independence Party because large numbers of people just do not trust the Conservative Party in Britain, for good reason. But enough people did not vote UKIP, enough people voted Conservative for David Cameron to get an overall majority. He got 50% of the seats, plus 15. He got a good majority in the House of Commons. And this meant that David Cameron had a total domination of British politics, because the leader of the Labour Party immediately resigned, and he was replaced by an elderly Marxist with a beard who thought that various Middle Eastern terrorist groups were probably misunderstood, and he liked the communist government of Venezuela, and the Labour Party immediately fell to pieces, and David Cameron was Prime Minister with a working majority in the House of Commons, and everything was wonderful. Now, David Cameron had not promised when he would call the election. All he'd said was, I will call a referendum at some point in the next 5 years. His biggest mistake was that he called the referendum for the 23rd of June 2016. That's just over a year ago. If he'd called the referendum immediately after winning the general election, I do believe that 75% of the British people would have voted to stay in the European Union. If he had decided to call the referendum now, I still think 75% of the people would vote to stay in the European Union. But for some reason that I don't understand, he called the referendum for June 2016. And he lost the referendum 52 to 48. Now, you may think 52-48, that's a very small margin. But if you break down the figures, it's not a small margin. If you take out the Scottish votes, because the Scottish don't matter in British politics, And if you take out the votes of the Irish Catholics, because Irish Catholics don't matter in British politics, and if you take out the votes of the black and brown people, because they don't matter in British politics, if you look at the native English, who are the largest and the most important and the richest group in British politics, we voted 2/3 to 1/3 to leave. It was a very large majority of the English people. The question of why we voted to leave, oh, I don't know. I'll tell you what I believe. It was Angela Merkel's decision in 2015 to open the borders. If you go and talk to an average person in England about subsidiarity in regulation of the sheep meat industry, he will give you a bored look. He may not understand the words you're using. If you tell him that Eurofund money, and we are the second biggest contributor to the European budget, if you tell him that Eurofund money is often spent without proper transparency, shall we say, he would shrug, because most British people are not aware that there are such things as Eurofunds. Our ignorance of the European Union is impressive. I think what decided it was the television pictures of those tens and hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers, so-called, pouring across the border and going through Austria into Germany. The thought was that these people would sit around in Germany for 4 or 5 years, get the right pieces of paper, and then come to England. We have quite enough of that already, we don't want any more. Whatever the case, we voted to leave. David Cameron, who until then had been the dominant politician in our country, found that his authority was destroyed, and so he resigned the day after the referendum. He was replaced by Theresa May, an interesting woman. She had campaigned to remain in the European Union. She had warned us in quite a large speech that to leave the European Union would be very bad for the country indeed. However, as soon as the referendum was over, she decided that we had to leave, and she would be the woman who took us out of the European Union. The Conservative Party did nothing to win the referendum to take us out of the European Union. The Conservative government mostly campaigned to stay in. It was the UK Independence Party that won the referendum. It was Nigel Farage and his warnings about unlimited mass immigration via Europe that won that majority. But as soon as she became Prime Minister, Theresa May made it very clear that Nigel Farage and the UK Independence Party and all those people in the Labour Party who had also campaigned to leave the European Union, they would have no say whatever in the manner of our leaving. This would be decided by her and by her ministers, who again mostly had been in favour of staying in. Now, immediately we began to look around and think, what's going on here? Is she being straight with us? I don't know if Theresa May was being straight with us, but what I'll tell you is that the government should immediately have served notice under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty that we would leave the European Union. Instead, they waited for 9 months after the referendum. I can tell you why they waited for 9 months after the referendum, and it does not give you a very good view of British politicians. Although there have been demands ever since 1973 that we should leave the European Union, there has never been any agreement on how or why we should leave the European Union, or on what we should do once we have left. Do we leave the European Union by holding a referendum, or do we let a party win an election? Do we serve notice under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, or do we simply repeal the European Communities Act, denounce the Treaty of Rome and walk away? Do we stay within the European Economic Area and therefore within the single market while we negotiate a trade treaty? Or do we simply walk away and rely on the World Trade Organization rules? Once we've left the European Union, do we become a kind of European Hong Kong or Singapore? Or do we become a very protectionist country? Or do we negotiate an entry to the North American Free Trade Agreement? Do we become, in effect, the 51st state of the United States? All of these options have been available, or all of these options have been discussed, but there has never been any agreement. And so the Conservatives decided after the referendum, yes, we're going to leave the European Union, but they didn't know how. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what agreements were in place afterwards. There was no agreement. Every week the politicians would tell us, it's all under control, we will leave the European Union soon. But we knew perfectly well the ministers couldn't agree. There were bitter arguments inside the government. Finally, on the 30th of March 2017, that's just a few months ago, the government finally served notice under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, we're leaving the European Union. Which means that at the end of 2 years, we leave. I don't think there is any way back from that. Now, at this point, the Prime Minister Theresa May decided that she needed more authority in order to negotiate an acceptable departure from the European Union. And so she called a general election. Everybody thought at first that she would win with the most enormous majority imaginable. The Labour Party was led, as I've said, by an elderly Marxist with a beard who liked the government of Venezuela and thought that various Middle Eastern terrorist groups were misunderstood, and whose dealings with the Irish Republican Army in the 1980s have never been satisfactorily explained. Everybody knew that Jeremy Corbyn would lead the Labour Party into catastrophe. It was so obvious that senior members of the Labour Party at the beginning of the election campaign were openly conspiring to replace Mr. Corbyn. They were discussing how many seats they would lose and how they would get rid of Mr. Corbyn afterwards. And Theresa May was the Conservatives were discussing how many hundreds more members of Parliament they would get. That's what everyone thought. All the clever people agreed. Theresa May is going to win this election with a huge majority. Well, what happened next? Oh dear. Well, imagine you have a fit and healthy young athlete. He is at the peak of his health and fitness. And one day, while he's sitting down, he has a heart attack and falls forward dead. But that's what happened to Theresa May. We had been told for 10 months, this woman is a political titan, she is another Margaret Thatcher. And then during the election campaign, we were able to take a good hard look at her, and we discovered that she was an incompetent robot. walking around unable to answer any unexpected questions and unable to respond to any unexpected event. She refused to enter into any debates with the other party leaders. Her normal reaction when we saw her on television was this. Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, he ran a brilliant campaign. I'm not an elderly Marxist. I don't have a beard. I don't like the government of Venezuela very much, or Middle Eastern terrorist groups, and I certainly don't like the Irish Republican Army. But I must say that Jeremy Corbyn ran a very good campaign. At the end of that campaign, he was speaking to vast open meetings like a pop star. The journalists, the opposition politicians, they couldn't understand what was happening. Theresa May did win. No, Theresa May, the Conservatives emerged from that election as the largest party in the House of Commons, but they'd lost their majority. Labour gained 30 seats. It's nowhere near being a party of government, but Jeremy Corbyn has a great deal more credibility. Theresa May, as I said, until a few months ago, she was regarded, or the media told us, that she was a political colossus, greater than Margaret Thatcher in her best days. Well, she's now a zombie. She is now the walking dead. The only reason she remains the Prime Minister is because nobody else in the government is brave enough or stupid enough to try to push her aside and take her position. And so the Conservatives continue in government with the support of one of the smaller Irish parties. And we're going to leave the European Union on the 30th of May 2019, and we still haven't started negotiating our exit. And the European commissioners are getting rather worried about this. One of them said a few months ago, "Please, British government, come and start talking with us. I cannot negotiate with myself." But the British government will not negotiate seriously with the European Commission on our departure because the politicians still do not know how to leave the European Union, because they do not agree on how or when to leave the European Union or on what to do afterwards. All I can tell you is that regardless of the chaos that we inflict on the rest of Europe, regardless of whatever costs we may impose on ourselves, we are probably going to leave the European Union. If you have been told, "Oh, the British will come to their senses, the British will have another referendum, and this time they will vote to stay in," if that's what you've been told, let me assure you it is probably not true. I say probably not true because I don't know what will happen next, but I don't think it will. I'll tell you why we're going to leave. The Conservative Party, as I have said, split in 1973 when we joined the European Union. The Conservative Party was split until the 23rd of June 2016. If a Conservative government fails to take us out of the European Union, it is not the case that the Conservative Party will split. What will happen is that Conservative voters will riot in the streets. If the government betrays us on this, we will drag these people out of their cars and burn them to death. We will never vote for them again. And the politicians know it. The Conservative politicians may not know how to leave the European Union. They may not agree on how we should leave the European Union. They may not actually want to leave the European Union, but they know perfectly well that they have no choice but to leave it. If they leave badly, that's something from which they can recover. They might lose a general election, but they'll be back for next time. If they fail to leave the European Union, if they bring about a situation in which there is another referendum, and this time we vote, this time a majority manages to get us to stay in, then the Conservative Party will disappear as a party of government, and the politicians concerned will just disappear. They'll have to go and find jobs doing something. And so the government is committed to taking us out. And although I do not regard myself as the greatest fan of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, he is after all an elderly Marxist with some very strange opinions, shall we say. I'll tell you this, he has always been opposed to British membership of the European Union. Forget the Conservative politicians, those people are professional hypocrites. Jeremy Corbyn has been arguing in and out of popularity for the past 40 years that we should leave the European Union, and he is delighted that we're leaving now. And so if by any chance the Conservatives fall to pieces over the next few years, and if we find ourselves with a Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, we shall continue to leave the European Union. And so what will happen next? Well, what I've dealt with so far is facts and probable facts. What will be the effect of a British departure from the European Union? There are two possibilities, actually there are three possibilities. One is that it will carry on much as before. There will have to be changes. All of that lovely Eurofund money that comes Slovakia's way will stop coming because the European Union will lose the British contribution. Indeed, you might find that you become net contributors to the European budget. That's a possibility. You're going to lose our money. But apart from that, it might just drift on. Another possibility is that the French and the Germans will come closer together, and they would agree that the way to stop this from happening again, the way to stop another member state from walking away, is to form a much closer political union. And so you might find that the European Union, or the remaining states of the EU, will turn into a true federal state. Well, I say a true federal state. It will turn into some kind of centralised state run by a cartel of French and German politicians. Or it is possible that the European Union will begin to fall apart. After all, it would be in British interests for the European Union to fall apart. At the moment, we are negotiating with a united front of 27 other member states, and we shall have to negotiate a trade agreement with those 27 other member states as represented by the European Commission. Once we're out, it'll be British, and to some extent also American interests, to split you apart. And do not underestimate the ability of the British and the American governments to spread disunity in the world. We are perfectly capable of turning the French and the Germans into the worst of enemies again. And as I said, it would be in British interests to destroy the European Union, so that instead of negotiating with 27 other member states represented by the European Commission in Brussels, we can negotiate with the French and the Germans and the Spanish, and we might decide it was in our interest to negotiate with the Slovaks and the Czechs and the Hungarians, or we might not. There is that possibility. But my closing point is that if your journalists or your politicians try to assure you that the British went mad last year, and sooner or later they will realise how mad they were, and they will decide not to leave the European Union, do not believe those assurances. We almost certainly shall leave the European Union because it is required by the electoral politics of my own country. The Conservatives are committed, whatever they think of it, they are committed to leaving. And the Labour Party is led by a man who also strongly believes in leaving. And as I said, we've pressed the button. We served notification. And unless the treaties can be reinterpreted in ways that nobody ever expected, there is no way back from that. So we shall leave the European Union. We may do it extremely badly, and we may suffer a recession, and we may set off a wave of chaos that spreads far across Europe and spreads over Slovakia even. But whatever the case, we are going to leave. And so with those cheerful words, ladies and gentlemen, I will end by talking to you. Thank you.
A ja teraz otváram priestor pre vaše otázky, tak ak máte otázku, prosím vás, zdvihnite ruku, predstavte sa a položte otázku. A ak naberiete odvahu, môžete ju prísť položiť aj na mikrofón, tak aby ju počuli všetci ostatní. Nech sa páči.
Hi, my name is Victor. Sorry about my English. I got a question. You said that if the referendum had taken place in 2015, the majority, like 75% of people, would vote for staying. Last year it turned out the way it turned out, and you said that if the referendum took place this year, that the outcome would be about, again, 75% of people voting for Remain. What makes you think so? What's the difference between 2016 and now?
In 2015, sorry, by the way, your English is excellent. Much better than my Slovak. In 2015, David Cameron had just won a general election. If he'd called the referendum and said, I do assure you that I am doing my best to secure a better deal for Britain in Europe, and you must help me by supporting me, I don't know if it would have been 75%, but I do feel he'd have won. Today, even forgetting everything that's happened in the past year, I suspect that most people, a small majority, would vote to stay in. 2016, an unusual year. We were still dealing with the shock of seeing what had happened in Germany with Angela Merkel, and the American the migration crisis. As I said, one of the reasons why you in Slovakia do not receive much in the way of immigration is that most immigrants don't want to live in your country. Stop smiling at me. You should be ashamed of yourselves now. The reason they don't want to live in your country is because you're not very friendly to immigrants. Immigrants don't want to learn your language. You don't have a very generous welfare system. And, well, that's a good start, isn't it? They want to come to England. We all know that. Indeed, I read a report yesterday in which the Germans are complaining about how few of their new immigrants are willing to learn German. They want to use English. Well, of course they want to use English, because Germany is just It's a stopping point on their great ambition, which is to come and live in England. And so we looked at this last year and we thought, oh, sod this, and we voted to leave the European Union. We're not putting up with that. However, something I haven't explained is that, you know, if a majority of us now would vote to stay in, probably, what's all the fuss? Why don't we just have another referendum? The answer is that if you repeated the referendum now, a year after the first one, there would probably be an even bigger majority in favour of leaving. We are where we are. We are to some extent in a soft war with the European Commission. We are no longer an integral part of Europe. We are now in a state of conflict with the European Commission. And so to vote to stay in the European Union would be seen as a surrender in this conflict. If, however, there had not been a referendum last year, if everything had been allowed to continue unchanged and the referendum were held now, then I do believe David Cameron, who would still be Prime Minister, would win that referendum. But the referendum drew lines in the sand. We have decided to leave. Perhaps it's a bad idea, but we've decided to leave and we're going through with it. That's what happens. Pardon me. Let me give you an analogy. It is quite possible that if there had not been parliamentary elections in the Czech and Slovak republics in June, I'm starting a long sentence, so I'll break it up. There were parliamentary elections in the Czech and Slovak republics in June 1992. Those elections produced specific outcomes in each republic. And those outcomes led to the breakup of Czechoslovakia in January 1993. It is possible that if the June 92 elections had been cancelled, and indeed they'd been held in June 1994, let's say, it is possible that Czechoslovakia would not have fallen apart. It's possible. But they happened. And because they happened in June 1992, and because of the particular outcomes of those elections, Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. It is the same with the European referendum. If David Cameron called the referendum a year earlier or a year later, we might not be where we are now. But he called it when he called it, and we are where we are now. And there's no way back from that. We are going to leave the European Union unless something very unexpected happens. And so you should prepare for that. Sorry, anybody else? Does anybody think that Slovakia should leave the European Union? No. Why not?
We're in a good place where we are.
Yes. What will you do when the Eurofund money stops coming?
Well, we need to work something out.
Yes. Very European. Who would like to come and live in England?
But they will not stop.
No.
Because like the UK is a net contributor that has about, I don't know, 10 to 15% share. So instead of receiving 3 billion euro every year, we might receive 2.5 billion. So it's not really a game-changing situation. Slovakia will be in next 5 or 7 years still net receiver, a little bit less, but all these octopuses living from European funds, all these networks will still survive.
Yes. I bow to your better understanding of these matters because, like most people in my country, my knowledge of exactly how the European Union works is not perfect. Very few of us have read the European treaties. Very few of us understand how European funds are distributed. Oh, we know that they're distributed in an untransparent manner, but we don't know how at all they're distributed. We don't even mostly understand how the common agricultural policy works. Let me ask you though, does anybody here think we're making a serious mistake in Britain to leave the European Union?
Why would a slight mistake, maybe not a serious one?
Okay, who would like to come and put the case for that proposition?
I would explain why.
Please.
Hello, my name is Georgi. I think it's a mistake because it leaves many open questions. The first is what will happen with British people who already live in the European Union? What will happen with the border with Ireland? That's like a treaty that comes from the European Union, and Britain and Ireland are in the same international area now. But when they split, it could bring back the era and the destruction and instability on the island.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Georgi. Yes, those are perfectly valid points. What is going to happen? What will be the status of British citizens who've retired to Spain once you've left the European Union? What will be the situation in Ireland, the northern part of which is part of the United Kingdom, the southern part of which is an independent state, an independent member state of the European Union? What will happen? Now, if in London we had a government which was effective or even moderately intelligent, I would be able to tell you, don't worry, this will happen. But we haven't. We don't actually have a government. What we have is a rolling political crisis. We don't know if Theresa May will still be Prime Minister next month. We don't know if she'll be Prime Minister after Christmas. We don't know if she'll be Prime Minister by next summer. We don't know who the Prime Minister will be. We don't know what agreement will be made within the government. We actually don't even know who the government will be. We have, as I said, a continuously unfolding political crisis in London, not a government. And so I can't tell you what agreement will be made regarding the border with Ireland or regarding the status of British citizens who live in the European Union, or indeed what will be the status of European Union citizens living in Britain. I don't know. All I can tell you is that some kind of agreement will need to be made. Don't ask me what it will be, don't ask me who will make it, or how it will be made, but something will happen. We know that it will happen. But let me be a little more serious. Obviously, the other member states of the European Union have a very strong interest in ensuring that after the 30th of March 2019, there is not a collapse into chaos. And so even if the British government is not able or willing to explain exactly what it wants, it is very likely that the French, the Germans, the Spanish, etc. will try to find out what will satisfy the British government and will give it to us. The European Union is, in international terms, an unusual, indeed a unique institution. And the manner in which Britain leaves the European Union will equally be unusual and indeed unique. I cannot... The breaking apart of Czechoslovakia 25 years ago involved a number of complications which nobody had thought through in advance. However, it worked. I know because I was here at the time. I don't believe either government had given serious consideration to how the same currency could be run by two sovereign independent governments. For a few weeks, the Czechoslovak crown circulated much as before, and then the Slovaks began to put special stickers on their banknotes which could be peeled off, and then eventually both governments brought in new currencies, and there were difficulties with the status of Czech citizens in Slovakia, Slovak citizens in the Czech Republic, and of course there were many complications regarding trade and investment and common ownership within the two republics. But these are matters which hardly anybody now remembers. They were not sorted out in advance because Mečiar's government did not actually want Slovak independence and was not prepared for Slovak independence, and the Klaus government in the Czech Republic was not prepared for a break-up of the country either. It is something that happened, and it took 6 months to a year after independence for longer-term agreements to be made. But what I can tell you is that I do not remember that people in the Czech and Slovak republics began to kill each other after January 1993. I don't recall that people in the Czech and Slovak republics fell down dead when the supermarkets ran out of food. I don't remember that the banks ran out of money. I don't recall any particular economic crisis in either country after this political decision at the last moment to break the country up. And so when I say that something will turn up between now and March 2019, I'm not just waving aside the very large difficulties and indeed problems that loom before us. I'm just saying that since the British government and the French and German governments have no interest in going to war with each other, since our various companies have every possible interest in continuing to trade with each other, and since the British and Irish governments have every possible interest in a soft or no border at all within Ireland, and since we all have plain interests with regards to the status of our various citizens, something will be arranged. It is the business, it's the job of politicians to find out what the people have decided and then to give it to us. And the British people decided last year, for good or ill, to leave the European Union, and it is the job of British politicians to put that into effect, and since the British politicians are quite plainly not competent enough to make the necessary decisions, it is up to everybody else to find a workable solution to the undoubted problem that has arisen in the past year. What I'm saying is that because of the incompetence and paralysis of the British political class in London, it may well be up to the various European governments to find a workable compromise. Search me what it will be.
What do you think about Nigel Farage?
What do I think of Nigel Farage? I have met Nigel Farage on a number of occasions, and we've got on very well. I greatly admire Nigel Farage. Unlike most British politicians, he's an honest man. He came into politics to get us out of the European Union. He won the European referendum, and he withdrew from British politics. Good luck to him. Of course, what you think of Nigel Farage, I suppose, depends entirely not on whether he's an intelligent man or a good man or a witty man. What you think of Nigel Farage depends absolutely on whether you think it's a good or a bad idea to leave the European Union. If you believe it's a bad idea to leave the European Union, then you will say that Nigel Farage is literally Hitler, a very bad man, a demagogue, a populist, an idiot, an economic illiterate, somebody who fails to understand the true position of Britain in the modern international order of things. If, on the other hand, you believe that Britain should leave the European Union, you will call Nigel Farage a visionary, a patriot, an honest man. And since I've decided it is a good thing for Britain to leave the European Union, obviously I regard Nigel Farage as a very great man. The lady over there.
I just want to ask about the economic impact the Brexit will have on not European Union but UK, and if this impact will be bad. Do you think that UK citizens will blame European Union for this?
Will the economic impact of British departure from the European Union be bad for Britain, and will British people blame the government for it?
European Union for that.
Will we blame the European Union for it?
If it's bad, and if there will be like considerable financial or economic difficulties.
Let me tell you this. At the moment, people are talking in terms of how, at the end of March 2019, Britain will fall off a cliff, or we will crash into a brick wall. Whatever particular metaphor you want to use, there is this great question mark over the date 30th of March 2019. However, there may be what in Monopoly is called a get-out-of-jail-free card, and it may be that the British politicians are not as incompetent and as paralysed as I've said they are. The European Union involves a customs union, the single market. To be a member of to participate in the single market, it is not necessary to be a member of the European Union. It is necessary instead to be a member of the European Economic Area. Iceland, Norway and Switzerland, and I believe Liechtenstein, these are not member states of the European Union. They are, however, allowed to participate in the European single market because they are members of the European Economic Area. Now, Britain is a member of the European Union, but it also appears to be a member of the European Economic Area. The EEA Treaty was signed in 1992 by Iceland, by Norway, by Sweden, and by the European Commission on behalf of the European Union. But it was also signed by all of the governments of the member states of the European Union.
On their own behalf.
On their own behalf. And so, even when we have left the European Union in March 2019, it seems to be the case, there is some legal argument over this, but it seems to be the case that we shall continue to be members of the European Economic Area.
That's good news.
Not necessarily, but it may be good news. One moment, let me finish, then I'll give the floor to you, the gentleman at the back. It may be that we shall continue to be members of the European Economic Area, and therefore we shall continue to participate in the single market. We shall be subject to about a quarter of European laws and regulations. although we shall not have any European commissioners, although there will be no British judges in the European Court, and although there will be no British members of the European Parliament, we shall also not be subject to the requirement of ever closer political union. And it may be that we have no desire to remain long-term in the European Economic Area, and we should eventually withdraw from that. But if what I'm saying is true, then we don't actually need to negotiate a withdrawal from the European Union. We just wait until 2019. We fall into the European Economic Area. We can then control our borders. We do not have to allow free movement of labour. We're subject to a quarter of European regulations. We can begin to negotiate a longer-term free trade agreement with the continuing members of the European Union, and we can negotiate free trade agreements with the Americans, the Australians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and all the others. And we shall gradually disentangle ourselves from the connections that we formed in 1972 and 1973. However, the gentleman at the back wants to say something. Can you come forward?
Thanks. I wanted to have a reaction on the European Economic Area, which you mentioned. That it is not actually really impossible, or at least I don't think it is possible for Britain to stay there, because the countries you mentioned, like Switzerland and Norway, they are in the European Economic Area, but for example, they accept Schengen, so they actually don't control their borders. They accept the free movement of people and the labor force. And the way I understand the European Economic Area, the basic treaties of the EEA, they actually guaranteed for freedom, so they are tied together. So once the Britain's condition is that they want to control the borders, then immediately Britain might actually withdraw from the treaty.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I understand your point. I do not regard myself as an expert in international law or in the interpretation of the relevant European treaties. I am told, however, that Article 112 of the EEA Treaty, signed in 1992, allows a member state to make an emergency derogation from the obligation of free movement of labour. It is possible to place emergency restrictions on the free movement of labour into an EEA country. And indeed, this is what Liechtenstein does. Liechtenstein has a strict quota on European Union citizens who are allowed to go and live and work in Liechtenstein. Some people say Liechtenstein is a special case. How big is Liechtenstein? It's about as big as Greater Bratislava, isn't it? And so, yes, of course, you can't allow totally free movement in, because you'll have 50 million people living there or something. However, a precedent is a precedent. Britain, let us suppose that Britain is, in its own right, a member of the European Economic Area, and that this cannot be taken away from us. We can't be expelled from it just because we've left the European Union. Then, because of Article 112 of the 1992 treaty, it is conceivable that the British government will just announce emergency restrictions on the free movement of people from Europe into Britain, and we shall be able to rely on the precedent of Liechtenstein. And, well, this is as much a political as a legal matter, but it seems that given the right degree of goodwill, or if that is lacking, given the right degree of political will, almost anything can be achieved within the scope of the European treaties. The idea that the European treaties do not allow this, I don't think so. These treaties are not exactly like an act of the British or the Slovak Parliament, where the meaning is quite plain and it means this and neither that nor the other. The meaning of an international treaty is very much more decided by the political will of the parties than by what the lawyers think the words truly mean. I could be wrong. We're talking about the future, and we're also talking about a state of affairs which has never existed before and which nobody thought ever would exist. The Lisbon Treaty provides it provides the mechanism for a member state to withdraw, but nobody ever thought that this mechanism would be used. And so we are walking in totally unfamiliar territory. All I can say is that despite the apparent incompetence and paralysis of the government in London, something will emerge and the lights will not go off on the 30th of March 2019. So the lady over there again.
You were talking about slow withdrawal, right? Do you think that the Germans and the French will allow this, considering the fact that Merkel said that she didn't want UK to become a president, so that the other countries will be inspired by it?
Now here, I may be falling into a common trap of British people. I may not realise the true status of my country in the international order of things, but my answer to your question is that the French and German governments will do as they are told. And let us look at the politics of the matter. I accept that Theresa May is a political zombie, shambling around London with pieces of flesh dropping off her.
Possibly.
But I don't regard Angela Merkel as in any better state. All right, she'll win the election this year. She'll win the election this year because the only other people to vote for are even worse than she is. But do you think that Angela Merkel is regarded by the German people with deep affection? The reason she'll win the election is because, well, there's nobody else.
Who wants to withdraw?
But it doesn't mean that she speaks with any great authority in Germany or for Germany. As for that man in France, whose name Macron, which is Latin for a long sign, Mr. Macron, it's quite obvious that he is a created politician. He is a political bubble blown up by the French establishment in order to stop Marine Le Pen from becoming president. He's done the job that he was employed to do. He stopped Marine Le Pen from becoming president, and he is now sinking without trace into political oblivion. And the idea that he will speak with authority in France and for France in negotiations with Britain is very unlikely. And so yes, I fully accept that the British ministers are incompetent and paralysed, but I do not see any kind of decisive leadership in Europe either.
You said Angela Merkel is very unpopular in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an example of a politician, a prime minister who will be running 3 terms and running for the 4th, who will be popular?
I bow to your greater knowledge of German electoral politics. It's just that all of my German friends speak of Angela Merkel with the greatest contempt and hatred, and I am assured, I don't speak German, I don't go to Germany very often except to drive through it, but I am assured that despite whatever she may have done in the past, Angela Merkel has destroyed herself politically by that rather strange decision in 2015 to open the borders, and that if she does win the election this year in Germany, it will simply be because there's nobody else to vote for. Indeed, the reason I vote Conservative, yes, there's a good analogy. I vote Conservative every time. I have the greatest possible contempt for the Conservative Party. I despise the Conservative politicians. I'm aware of their incompetence and their corruption and their probable treason, but I vote for them. And the reason I vote for them is because I regard the Labour Party as even worse. And I suspect that there are millions of Germans in the same position. They look at Angela Merkel and they think she's a disgusting woman. But then they look at the other parties and think, oh well, better vote for her. That means that she will win the election, but she doesn't have the affection and the support of the German people. I may be wrong, but that's my feeling in the matter.
You don't need the affection, you need the votes.
I disagree with you.
But do you think that she is no longer competent in what she has done so far? Like to carry on with the same things?
Let me put this to you. You need two things to exercise power in a democracy. You need a vote in your favour at a particular point in time. That puts you into office. You then need the obvious continuing support of the electors so that you can be in power. Now, it is... I have seen any number of cases of governments which were put there by a majority on a particular day, but whose support has drained away and who are unable to govern effectively because of that. And so Angela Merkel, she will have the votes, but votes in themselves do not give you legitimate authority. I'm sorry, I've seen this many times in my life in Britain. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
Yes.
But even if it's so, the party that won the election, and even though they don't have the obvious support of the people, they still must have certain program. They must carry on doing things that they either promise to people or...
Oh yes. They will continue to build motorways and they'll continue to collect the taxes.
So there is some continuance in...
Yes. Somebody has to run the post office. Somebody has to...
that's my...
Somebody has to turn up to international gatherings. Somebody has to reform the law of contract or something. But when a government has lost the support of the people, its ability to do anything unusual, its ability to take a firm line in international dealings is very, very limited. You see, in my own country, Theresa May, she won more votes at the last election than any other party. There are more Conservative members of the House of Commons than any other party. And now she has the support of one of the Irish parties. She has a majority again. She has the votes, but she has no authority. Many things that she said she would do, she's unable to do. The arithmetic in the House of Commons is much the same as before the election. She has a working majority, I believe, of 13. Before the election, she had a working majority of 15, so she's lost 2. But the votes don't tell you everything. She has lost authority. And it's the same, I think, with Angela Merkel and any other politician who may win an election but does not have legitimacy.
But isn't it about the inner motivation after that of these politicians, that they've lost the momentum and then they just feel they don't have the support? It's about media who create this picture of them and push it through. You know, it's like these things somehow correlate.
Well, we're in agreement, yes. You're just saying the same as I am, but in different words.
Okay.
Now, do you?
I would like to ask about the arguments that helped to win the debate about membership in EEC in 72 or 73, if that's possible.
Yes.
The second question would be, what's the probability of Scottish referendum on independence and the potential result? And the third one would be, what's your ideal picture of Britain outside of EU in terms of labour movement and customs union and trade?
Yes. Okay. Right. Why did we join the European Union in the first place? The answer is because of a failure of nerve within the British ruling class in the 1960s. We had high unemployment. No, we didn't. We had high inflation. We were embarrassed by the loss of global status. We were aware that our economic growth rate was far inferior to that of the Germans and the French. And we believed, or at least our politicians believed, that joining the European Union, or during the European Economic Community as it was, would provide an economic shock that would get the British economy working again. That's one of the main reasons why we joined. And actually it wasn't necessary. It was not it was not membership of the European Union that saved the British economy. It was Margaret Thatcher. So one of those ironies of history. Do I think that Scotland will become independent? No, I don't. Sometimes I rather wish they would, but I don't think they will. I feel somehow that if there were another referendum, the Scottish would vote to stay within the United Kingdom. Things have changed in the past 2 years. When the Scottish had their referendum, when was it? 2015? October 2015? I can't remember. Yes, September 2015 they had their referendum. At the time, it was a strong possibility, again the lawyers weren't sure about it, it was a strong possibility that if the United Kingdom broke up into England and Scotland, both parts would remain part of the European Union. Therefore, Scotland would have political independence and continuing access to the single European market. However, we are going to leave the European Union whether or not the Scottish like it. And if the Scottish decide to vote for independence after that, then they would have to apply to rejoin the European Union, and that might take quite a long time, and the Scottish would have to accept membership of the Euro, and they'd have to join the Schengen Agreement, and it's all very uncertain. And let's face it, the Scottish have in the past 3 years voted twice against independence. They voted not to become independent from Britain, and they voted not to become independent from the European Union. And so a third referendum, they'd probably still vote not to become independent. What would I like in the long run? There are certain facts which are obvious and inescapable. Many of my friends in Britain believe that my country's future lies in a close, indeed an ever closer relationship with the United States. I disagree with those friends. A relationship with the United States is rather like a relationship between a mouse and an elephant. There is no possibility of an equal relationship. The United States has interests which are not the same as the interests of my country. In some respects, the interests of the United States are hostile to the interests of my country. If we join into any kind of ever closer relationship with the United States, we shall simply be submerged. Now, if you want Britain to become the 51st state of America, that may not be a bad thing, but I don't. I think the natural interest of Britain is in a close, indeed a very close and friendly working relationship with the French and the Germans. We are brothers, we are neighbours. We are bound by ties of history, by ties of religion, and by ties of blood. The idea that there should ever be another war in Europe is absolutely abhorrent to me and to anyone else of goodwill. We've had 2.5 wars in the past 100 years. We had the Great War, we had the Second World War, and then we had the Cold War. And all of those were catastrophic for European civilization. And the idea that we would ever go to war again in our continent must be abhorrent. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be a disaster if we did. Now, of course, nobody's talking of a war. But, as I said, the interest of Britain and France and Germany lies in a very close working relationship. A close political relationship, a close economic relationship, and a close strategic and military relationship. Just because Britain is about to leave the European Union does not mean, or should not mean, that we are about to fall into any degree of hostility in our relations with our European neighbours. What I am saying, and what many people in Britain are saying, is that although a European Union is an excellent idea, we have so much in common. It's obvious, I don't need to spell out our common interests and our commonality as peoples. But the European Union is not the way to bring about this coordination of interests between our various countries. We need to move beyond the European Union with its Brussels institutions and its common agricultural policy and its structural funding and all the rest of it. We need to move to a different kind of close relationship between the peoples of Europe.
And don't you think that Britain is somehow relying on its relationship with their ex-Commonwealth countries, and that's why it's so sure about its position? I mean, in trade, for example, Britain is relying on the ex-Commonwealth countries to trade with, and yeah, that's the point.
Yes, obviously once we are out of the European Union, there will be a rebalancing of our trade. We shall not cease to trade with Europe, but we shall do a great deal more trade with other parts of the world, chiefly Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and other places that were once painted red on the map. But as I said, that does not mean that we are leaving Europe. It does not mean that we shall fail to pursue close and friendly relationships with the other European states. And as I said, there is a natural identity of interests between Britain and France and Germany. We are countries of about the same size. We are countries of about the same wealth. We are countries which face exactly the same threats, and we are countries which have much the same opportunities in the world. We are united by common bonds of history and religion and of fellowship in other ways. And the idea that these three countries will become hostile to each other is extraordinarily unlikely, is very unwelcome, and I think that once some kind of agreement has been reached on our terms of departing from the European Union, you will see the emergence of a much more harmonious working relationship between London, Berlin and Paris than has so far been the case. And of course, I'm not forgetting all of the other European peoples. We are all brothers and sisters, and we stand or we fall. We stand together or we fall together. But the European Union, as it actually exists, is not the right institution by which we shall stand together. That's what the argument is. It's not about Britain withdrawing from Europe and hoping that we can somehow recover our greatness of the 19th, early 20th centuries. No, we are not children in that respect. The idea is to find a better working relationship between the peoples of Europe than the European Union as it exists currently allows. That's the long-term challenge that we face. And as I said, we have to rise to that challenge because whether or not you like it, we're leaving the European Union.
If I may take the privilege of the last question. If I remember well, 2 or 3 years ago when we were discussing the UK membership in the EU, you were saying that despite all imperfections of the European Union and all the excessive regulation and creeping harmonization, etc., you were saying that you are happy that you are in the European Union because the membership prevents your British politicians from making stupid things fast. And we all know that the European Union, all the processes are very rigid, very slow, etc., etc. So this was one. If I recall well, this was one of your arguments. And now you say that you are happy with the withdrawal and the UK departure from the European Union. So I'm curious, why did you change your mind?
I've always believed in leaving the European Union. However, I began to think again about the European Union after the Iraq War. Until the Iraq War, I had regarded the European Union as an extraordinarily evil institution, and although I was not entirely happy with our American relationship, I didn't regard it as actively bad. After the Iraq War, a most evil foreign policy adventure, I realised that an American friendship was not at all in British interests, and therefore we should stay close with our European brothers and sisters. That would still be my position. It's just that we voted to leave the European Union, and having voted to leave, that has changed everything. Since we voted to leave, we must leave. We must take advantage of the fact that we voted to leave, and we must make the best of things. Personally, and my daughter may cut this out of the video, personally I don't care either way. On balance, I suppose it's probably a good idea to leave the European Union, but if the people had voted to stay in, I wouldn't be crying into my coffee. But we have voted to leave, And you see, that's changed everything. We can't go back from that. If we do somehow go back on it, if we do turn up in Brussels and say, we've thought about this again, we want to stay, it would be the most terrible national humiliation. And so, for good or ill, we've got to go through with it, and we've got to make the best of it. That's not a very good answer, I agree, but it's the only one I can think of. As I said, if the referendum had gone 52 to 48 to stay in the European Union, it wouldn't have been a catastrophe. But it went 52-48 to come out, and since we have voted to come out, I think we'd better go through with it.
Thank you. Now we are coming to the end. I would like to thank you in the audience for coming to this lecture and staying till the end in this hot summer weather. And let me also thank our special guest, Dr. Sean Gabb, for his exhaustive elaboration on Brexit. And hopefully we will see each other next year in another annual Sean Gabb's lecture. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for having me to the audience.